Good afternoon, everyone. Goedemiddag. Welcome to the webinar, The Dutch Solar PV Market, Different Roles of the Government and the Development of Rooftop Solar. My name is Christian, Project Manager at Solarplaza, and with me is my colleague Marco. And I'm glad to see that so many industry professionals are joining us this afternoon. I hope you're all keeping safe and healthy during these challenging times. This is our webinar program for today. This afternoon, we're going to talk about the Dutch PV market, which is still booming, and where 2018 marked the first year in which more than 1 gigawatt of new capacity was installed. In 2019, almost 2.5 gigawatts of new capacity was installed. So as of now, the Netherlands has crossed 7 gigawatts of cumulative installed capacity. However, there are also a lot of developments that offer both challenges and opportunities. Multiple stakeholders are working hard currently to build the future energy grid in the Netherlands. We see new applications for solar PV take off, like floating plants and carports. New policies are brought to life, like the regional energy strategies and the revised SDE++ subsidy scheme. And there's an increasing focus and priority on rooftop solar as well. And of course, the latest unexpected development is the impact of the coronavirus on the supply chains and the development pipelines. So these are just a selection of everything that's going on in the dynamic Dutch PV market. But today, we will be focusing on the different roles of the government and the development of rooftop solar in the country. And our speakers will be focusing on an overview of the market, updates on the regional energy strategies and the subsidy scheme, decentral policy developments, the development process of rooftop solar, and also the insurance and certification of these installations. And on the 8th and 9th of July, we will go much more in depth during the 12th edition of the Solar Future NL. But before we continue, I would like to introduce Solarplaza to you. Our mission is to positively impact the world by accelerating the sustainable energy transition, and through our events, newsletters, and the news portal, we help renewable energy professionals become more effective in their business development by providing unique networking opportunities and high-level content. And since 2004, we have organized more than 140 events in more than 40 countries around the globe. And as I said, this webinar is in anticipation of the Solar Future NL taking place on 8 and 9 July in Utrecht. And once again, we will assemble the most relevant solar professionals in the Dutch market and discuss the challenges and opportunities related to the Dutch PV market. And this webinar is especially connected to two workshops that we will be organizing in collaboration with Holland Solar on the first day of the event. And as the leading business and strategic platform for the Dutch solar energy market, we are expecting over 350 attendees from all the relevant stakeholder groups. And currently we are working hard on setting up an exciting and interesting program. Here you already see a selection of speakers at the event, and we will be adding more speakers to the program continuously. So make sure to subscribe for updates to stay in the loop on program updates, new speakers, and the list of attendees. And some final practical notes before we begin. It's possible to submit questions during the entire webinar by typing them in the questions box. Please indicate as well to which speaker the question is directed, and we will try to discuss all of the questions at once in the Q&A round after the presentations at the end of the webinar. And in case you have technical questions, you can use the chat box. And the whole webinar will be recorded as well, and the presentation slides will be made available after the webinar, but are also available now in the handouts section on the right. So let's continue with the webinar and go to the speakers. Amelie Veenstra is a policy director at Holland Solar, and she has been involved in a lot of policy making for the solar energy sector, and she also has over 20 years of experience with renewable energy and sustainable building. And Remco van der Horst is a rooftop solar expert at Holland Solar, and he is a dedicated renewable energy professional with a background as a lawyer and legal counsel in the public and private sector, and he has over 12 years of experience in the renewable energy domain. So let's continue with the webinar and go to the presentation. Amelie, I think you will take the floor first. Please go ahead. We will give you the mouse and the controls.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is healthy and happy. It's an honor to give you a heads up on the changes in the role of local governments in solar project developers. First, allow me to switch. Yes, first allow me to reflect a little on the basics of the market developments right now in the Netherlands. Here you see the graph explaining the growth of installed capacity in the Netherlands divided by market segments. So in total, you already heard that about 7 gigawatt peak is now installed in the Netherlands. The blue bars are residential, the yellow bars are commercial rooftop, and the green ones are the ground-mounted solar parks. So what you see here is that the residential market, depending on net metering, is still going strong, and commercial rooftop is increasing a lot in its development. And the new kid on the block is the ground-mounted solar parks in the Netherlands, now reaching about 1 gigawatt peak of installed capacity. Well, this is all, of course, now the very interesting past, and I would like to tell you about what will happen in the future. So we show you a little bit how the pipeline is of solar PV. So what you see here is the SDE rounds. SDE is the feed-in tariff scheme in the Netherlands. What you see here is every half a year there's a round of an option to apply for SDE grants. Well, what you see here is the total amount of granted money in billion euros, which are maximized every round. And of course, the yellow piece of the bar is solar techniques. So what you can see is that from 2016, there are a lot of grants given for solar PV projects on the ground as well as on roofs. Well, in this bar, I explained how many gigawatt hour peak this is per round. So these are the granted gigawatt peaks per round. And what you can see here is we calculated the yet to be realized gigawatt hours per round. And this all adds up to a total of 11.5 gigawatt peak in the pipeline yet to be realized in the Netherlands. And this has to be ready in 1 till about 4 years. So this will lead to about 3 gigawatt peak extra added capacity per year for commercial and ground mounted. So we can expect a lot of extra growth in the next years. So I hope this is clear for you. So I will now skip to what, just 1 minute. Oh yeah, sorry. What I would like to share with you is, because this is a very important change in the Netherlands, is how this SDE subsidy scheme will be designed in the future, in the very near future. So I seem to have a little technical problem with not able to skip. Yes, okay, thank you. So what will happen with SDE in the near future? So right now there's a so-called spring round happening from March the 17th till the 30th. There's one last SDE round in old style with a total budget of 4 billion. But in the second half of this year, we call that the autumn round, that will start a new type, the new style SDE++, we call it. And this will take on till at least 2025. And then the SDE will expect it to vanish in the Netherlands for renewable electricity projects. So I will enlighten a little bit about the differences between SDE Plus and SDE++. Very important to know is that the SDE++ will allow other types of CO2 reducing techniques in the scheme, like CCS, but also heat distribution and electrification of boilers, etc., and so on. So this is a big change. There will be more competition in this subsidy scheme, and also the budget will be reduced to 5 billion per year, and there will be only one round per year when you can apply for a subsidy grant, as opposed to the 2 rounds per year in the past. So this will lead to, of course, uncertainty about the chance of success for solar PV and the SDE++. Also important to know that the ranking in granting the subsidy will be based on the subsidy intensity per megaton CO2 reduction of this project over its whole lifespan. So this is a little bit complicated way. It's a little bit complicated method to calculate the CO2 reduction of CO2 projects. So you have to be aware of that. 2 important changes for specific applications of solar PV is that rooftop will have an advantage from in this new method because it will have a better ranking position, and this will be due to the expected self-consumption. Well, this is a bit complicated to enlighten, so this we could explain, of course, during the Solar Future event. Also important to have in mind that the Carports PV can now apply as a rooftop solar category instead of ground mounted. So this will be better because these type of projects can apply for a higher subsidy rate. Okay, this is very important background to know. And so now I can go on and tell you about the changes in the role of the local government. Yes. In the climate agreement, there is defined what the role of the local governments will be in the near future. And the climate agreement says that the electricity goals in 2030 will be like 20.2 CO2 megatons reduction. We will have to have 49 terawatt-hour offshore wind in 2030, 35 terawatt-hour onshore wind plus solar, larger projects, so SDE projects, with 50% local ownership. I will come back to that later in the later sheet. And they expect like 7 terawatt-hour on the residential sector. Well, in order to realize this, we in the Netherlands decided to start regional, so-called regional energy strategies, RES. And this will be the new instrument to, well, stimulate, enforce projects. But the whole fundamental reason we do this is because we want to have strategies developed with maximum of local support, and also we need strategies following the grid capacity in place in the Netherlands. So these so-called regional energy strategies are developed together with local organized citizens, but also with grid operators and all kinds of local or national NGOs. And of course the municipalities, because the municipalities are the combined regions. So this is a very, very new role in the Netherlands for the municipalities, that they have to define altogether with all kinds of stakeholders. They have to define this regional energy strategy. Concepts of these strategies has to be ready June the 1st, and the final strategies has to be ready in March 1st next year. Very important is that these vehicles will define the new conditions of new municipal spatial policies in relation to renewables. So municipalities will base their local policies on these regional energy strategies. And why this is important? Because they will define the conditions where and why and how a solar project will have to, can be developed or not. So this is important to follow, because it will define the options in the future. One note is that this is actually a remarkable thing in the Netherlands. I think it's very funny, but because 26 terawatt hours is already proven pipeline solar and wind, and this is based on all pre-RES policies. So a huge amount, a significant amount, I must say, is already realized before a regional energy strategy is in force. Well, what will be the local new rules for social developers? Before I elaborate a little bit more on that, I please have to note that in the Netherlands, the municipalities are the main authorities for spatial policies, and that new rules on solar and solar spatial policies are now being developed in various municipalities. Some of the municipalities have already policies in place, and others have not. So this means that there is now happening a variety of rules for solar developments, and this is also shifting in time. So this is for a lot of solar developers very confusing. But this is just what it is. We cannot change that. Important in this aspect to know is that ground-mounted solar PV, they need a permit, but rooftop projects in the Netherlands do not need permits. So this is, so actually they will not have any influence on spatial policies whatsoever. Another trend in the Netherlands is that they are starting tendering from governmental territory, and these will be subject to similar rules as others. Right. Now you know that. I will elaborate more on what will be new type of rules for solar developers. We introduced a concept in the Netherlands, which is called solar ladder. Yeah, well, in Dutch, it's zonneladder. And this basically means that there will be an order of preference where you install solar PV. So the preferred place where solar should develop is rooftops. The second preferable place will be unused land or multifunctional use. And the third is actually explained as preferably not on agricultural land nor nature. So what you will see is that on a local level, municipalities will try to implement these conditions, these type of requirements in their local policies. We do not know yet how exactly this will be done, but this is actually in debate in the Netherlands between municipalities and the national government. So we do not yet exactly know how this will be treated in practice. Another very important thing and very complicated thing also is that we, in the climate agreement, we stated that 50% of all the projects as a whole will have to have 50% local ownership. This will be required, and this will also be included in local policies. So this will mean that locals are asked to invest and own projects for around 50% as on a whole level. So an average, I mean. So an average will have to be 50% local ownership, meaning that a lot of municipalities will ask solar developers to develop together with the environment. So all kind of citizens or companies around a project. So this is a very complicated new task in practice. How will we be able to develop new propositions enabling locals to invest, co-invest and own and bear their, and also have the same type of risks as a company. Another type of requirement in this respect is that they say, well, okay, if this is not possible, then other types or financial participations are required. So this means that in the next future, on local level, a lot of explaining has to be done between municipalities, citizens, and project developers in order to meet this specific new societal requirements, so to say. Well, and the last thing I want to address is that also for solar developers, ecological benefits will be required. So actually a project developer will have to show in the near future what the ecological improvements of its ground-mounted solar park will bring, and how will they monitor and improve and invest in, for instance, biodiversity or a better soil quality, etc., and so on. So this was a small heads up on new rules and new type of responsibilities of municipalities towards solar developers. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks a lot, Amelie, for the quick overview on all these topics. In the meantime, for our listeners, please keep submitting questions during the next presentation. Already some questions came in, so we will discuss these in a bit. But first, we'll proceed right away with Remco's presentation. So please, Remco, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar. We hope to give you a bit of an overview, which we, with some focus already, which we will further dig into once we're at the event in July, at which I very much look forward to being able to shake everybody's hand by then. The Dutch rooftop solar market to date, this last official data we could find, is kind of split up between the roofs of homes, of course. Then we have the solar parks on land and the roofs of businesses. Here we have the volumes. Excuse me, these are the parks. We obviously see a rapid growth solar on land. We still see growth in roofs on business, and indeed the houses is one which is growing very rapidly as well. The latest figure that I heard is that we now have over 800,000 homes in the Netherlands which have some form of rooftop solar installed. The two major topics I would like to discuss right now in about 15 minutes. I hope to leave more than enough time for everybody to be able to ask questions and both Amelie and I to answer them. The first big one to answer is how to realize the potential of almost 900 square kilometers of potential rooftops. We based this figure on a research done by Deloitte in the Netherlands, and on their website that research can be found, the combination of geodata and using a number of maps which they had access to come to this figure, and combined, of course, with the regional energy strategies. I would like to focus on how this can be realized. The most important aspect is, I think, that there's very strong public support for rooftop solar. A lot of people nowadays who were skeptical 10 years ago, and very cynical about solar in the Netherlands, it's not exactly the sunniest country on earth, now say, putting solar on rooftops is almost a no-brainer. That helps a lot at the moment. And looking at the municipalities, who, as we just understood from Amelie, are in fact responsible for the actual realization of all these targets, these renewable energy strategies, this is quite something to take into account, that a lot of municipalities in the Netherlands do not have a lot of potential for land-based solar, especially in the western part of the Netherlands. There is very limited space available. If there's any space, it's usually too expensive to develop solar on land. So let me stress that there is no conflict of interest between rooftops or land. It's just a matter of which municipality has the facilities for which solution. One of the things which is important to know, and is still pretty exceptional, I believe, globally, that there are absolutely no permits required for large rooftop solar installations. The only two exceptions that we have is if it concerns a monumental building. That does not mean that it is impossible to install a solar installation, but the requirements are indeed there, and one requires approval, or buildings which lie within a cultural heritage zone, like the center of the city of Amsterdam. Also there, it's not impossible, but there permits are required. Another supportive aspect for rooftop solar in the Netherlands is that by now it is a very well-developed setting. We have great developers, installers, EPC players. The banks are well known to the market, etc., etc. The limiting aspects are, however, still there. And the most important one is, of course, the decrease of financial support for the larger systems on land and on rooftops. This was, of course, the SDE subsidy scheme, as just discussed by Amélie. And for the housing market, the smaller installations, this was the net metering scheme, which is gradually being reduced, or put differently, it's going to be phased out in a number of years. Looking at the present SDE Plus scheme, that provides stronger support to grid-connected installations than those behind the meter. This was introduced a number of years ago because it was found by the government that the systems behind the meter had other benefits, like not having to pay the full energy tax and the variable transport costs of the grid operator. So by lowering that particular subsidy for rooftop solar behind the meter, a lot of large systems were being developed and fed directly into the grid. Interestingly enough, as you may have deduced from the presentation from Amélie, we are now moving to the SDE++ scheme starting in the autumn of this year, whereby it will become more interesting again, from a subsidy perspective at least, to install behind the meter again. So funny enough, we started off with larger systems behind the meter, then the subsidy scheme changed and it became financially more interesting to feed into the grid. So especially large installations all were directly grid connected, and now we are moving back as of autumn of this year to a scheme whereby new projects can get a higher subsidy from the government when they are behind the meter installed. The municipalities, which we just discussed, have one bit of a problem. They lack enforcement mechanisms. This is basically the other side of the coin from sub C of the supportive aspects. We said there are no permits required, and yet here that also brings along, in a way, that there are no administrative law mechanisms whereby a government entity can force a building owner to install solar PV on its particular roof. Obviously, the municipalities can tender solar for their own rooftops, but that's only a rather small percentage of all available roofs. So the meeting I attended a couple of weeks ago, where many civil servants from various municipalities were present to discuss the potential and also the hurdles of rooftop solar in the Netherlands, focused a lot on finding positive ways to stimulate building owners to install solar on the roofs. So this is still clearly something that many entities are looking at. How can we achieve how can we convince building owners to have solar PV on their buildings? We do still see that there is, as we say here, a limited interest from building owners because they find the financial benefits rather limited, or we have the particular situation where you have the split incentive that the building owner will not receive any of the financial benefits of the solar PV installation because the power may go to the lessees of the particular floor space. But we do see, and we do believe that this market will develop simply because of the fact that many municipalities, once again, will have the obligation to do their part in these renewable energy strategies, and many municipalities only have the option of rooftop solar. If I look at a renewable energy strategy from the province of Zeeland, which is completely in the southwest of the Netherlands. It's one of the less densely populated provinces in the Netherlands. And even there, they've said 50% of our solar target, which was 1 gigawatt, 50% of that target has to be realized on rooftops. And once again, let me stress, this is a province in the Netherlands which is not very densely populated compared to others. Allow me now to move over to the insurance aspects. We've received a lot of comments from our members and others in the industry, and this relates particularly to rooftop solar, that the insurance companies have become less enticed to provide a beneficial scheme, or at least a payable scheme for a project where it relates to the insurance of the building and the solar PV installation. So we got in touch with the overall organization where all insurance are organized and met with them and a number of our members. And of course, it became clear that we have a common interest. We all want safe installations. We want as limited amount of incidents as possible. And both would prefer 0 incidents. So we're on the same track where that concerns. What is in fact missing in the Netherlands is in the regulatory space, there are no particular legal requirements for taking for commissioning a solar PV installation. Obviously, the banks require the testing of installations before they're taken into use, and the insurers can, to a certain extent, benefit from the tests and the inspections that are being done on behalf of the banks. But legally, the rules are there, but the inspections, etc., are not required. And we've seen that due to a number of incidents, the insurers have what I call raised the bar for rooftop solar installations and indeed building owners. Now, one of the things that we have definitely run into is that a lot of new buildings use all kinds of materials which in themselves have a certain fire hazard contained within them. They're easy to use, makes it possible to construct large buildings and logistical centers, etc., pretty quickly, but they are considered a risk by the insurance companies. And if you then also come up with the suggestion of installing a solar installation on the roof, the insurance company may either completely reject that idea as a possibility and will not insure the building then anymore, or come up with conditions and terms which do not make a solar PV installation viable from a financial perspective. So in the discussions we had with the industry, and we were fortunate to also be involved in these talks by Techniek Nederland, which is the overall organization for the Dutch installers. We've come to agree to a 2-tier approach. On the one hand, we wish to certify installers and their personnel so that they have received the necessary training to install solar PV. And indeed, we also wish to certify installations under a scheme called Scope 12. This is already being introduced, and just before this webinar, I looked up on a number of websites from entities which are allowed to certify both installers and train people, that the courses are already there. One can already subscribe to these courses, although of course in the present setting, I don't know how they will deal with that. They will probably cancel the first few ones, I'm afraid. But this is something one can apply for by now. And we will also work with standard forms, depending obviously on the size of the solar PV installation, so that an inspection has been done of the particular installation before it was put into use. We are very positive on how this will work out in this half year, and I hope to be able to tell you more about this in detail when we meet in July of this year. Christian, I think we are now in the position to answer questions from the audience or any other issues which arise.
Yes, thanks a lot, Remco, as well. Yeah, we can indeed proceed to the Q&A, but before that, I would like to pull up a poll question as we're speaking about the transition of the SD subsidy scheme for the first time since existence, and we are moving to a market parity situation in the future. Let's gather some input from the attendees. To see what the sentiment is in the market on when we will possibly meet a subsidy-free solar situation in the Netherlands. So let's open up the poll question and show some results on the screen. And as you can see, okay, so the majority of attendees expects solar to go subsidy-free in the Netherlands in 2 to 3 years. So that is actually already before 2025. People expect maybe that developers will make the leap to merchant solar, maybe because it's possible, or maybe because the SD++ scheme will not allow for many projects to be awarded anymore. We'll see, but that's okay. So that's a nice indication. Let's go to the questions, because we have received quite a lot of questions in the meantime. So I hope we will be able to answer most of them. Let's see. I will ask my colleague to scroll up in the list. Let's take one question regarding the situation with the coronavirus. Not too many, because of course it's a lot of speculation at this point. But someone's asking, what are your ideas on how the coronavirus will impact the solar business in the Netherlands? Amelie, Remco, do you have some ideas about this, or is it not possible to say anything about that right now?
I could state something. Well, it will all, of course, depend on will we as the Netherlands be in lockdown, and if so, for how long? And also, of course, how many countries around us will be in lockdown. So it all depends on what will the policies, the corona policies. But right now, as today, a lot of installations are still going on. So there is no lack of material in a whole, and there is no real lack of installation force. But of course, there are a lot of questions about this, if this will be the case tomorrow. So we are not really comfortable with it, of course, like everyone. This is the case, of course. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's continue with a couple of other questions. And I would like to mention to the attendees as well, there are some really technical and questions coming in, questions involving calculations as well. For those questions really involving calculations and numbers, etc., I would like to ask you to send an email to Amelie and Remco. You can see their email address on the screen, because it will be difficult to really dive into those now. But for instance, there's a question also around innovation in the market. So for solar trackers and bifacial solar panels, is there like a special arrangement for this in the SDE scheme? Are these technologies already accounted for in the categories, or not really? Do you know something about this?
Yes, solar tracking systems are also they do have a specific category in the SDE, but bifacial not yet.
Okay, so only for the tracks. But of course, I can imagine that you can simply apply projects with bifacial panels, and then depending on your results, do you know whether it might be more favorable? You have a higher probability of getting a subsidy awarded if you use bifacial panels, or is that hard to say?
Yes, you can have more. Of course, you can expect better results, of course, in terms of in terms of megawatt hours per year. So you will be entitled to grant for more subsidy because you have more running hours, right? So this is especially interesting for floating. In the Netherlands, tracking systems are mainly floating systems.
Yeah, I can imagine. And talking about floating, because that is another question, are those accounted as ground-mounted systems or commercial systems in the SDE? Because there's no separate category, right?
Yes, it depends on if it's more or less than 1 megawatt peak, but there is a specific floating category. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And also, you talked a little bit, Amelie, about the results of the past rounds and also your expectation for the second round in 2019. Do you know when the results of these rounds are expected, the 2019 autumn round? Because they haven't been published yet.
No, it always takes about at least 6 weeks and maybe more when we can expect results. Because this was a very a round with a lot of applications, I think it will last a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Because there's oversubscription for this round again, of course.
Yeah. So, but well, when you say this, I will ask them, of course, when we can expect, because actually we should all expect it like any time, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well. And one question for you, Remco. Could you explain more how the SDE++ supports solar projects behind the meter more than the SDE Plus did? Because you had a mention on this in the slides.
Okay. The basic idea is I have a table here in front of me. Basic idea is that they take into account that 60% on average of many systems, they calculated about 60% of production is consumed behind the meter for installations between 15 kilowatt peak and 1 megawatt peak. This goes both for buildings and ground-mounted systems, or floating systems even, and that solar PV systems over 1 megawatt peak, the results were also still 60% for building, for rooftop solar installations, but only 15% for ground-mounted systems or floating systems. And taking this percentage into account, that is how they have kind of corrected the sum for rooftop solar. There's this table, but it is all in Dutch, I'm afraid, whereby you can see that the basic subsidy amount then for installations rooftops between either 15 kilowatt peaks and also over 1 megawatt peak get a higher subsidy, cents per kilowatt hour than the ground-mounted systems. So those figures have been published.
Yeah. Okay. And
that's how the benefit materializes in a bit of a higher subsidy. Whereas, as I said, right now it's under the SDE plus scheme, only one plus. It's the other way around.
Yeah,
grid connected power gets a higher amount of cents per kilowatt hour as compared to the ones which are connected behind the meter, allowing for self-consumption. So we're flipping that.
Yeah. So basically, okay. So the other way around for the upcoming rounds. And one more question for you, Remco. You mentioned the report that had been published by Deloitte. And someone is wondering, how has this been calculated? The potential of 892 square kilometers commercial rooftop. How? What does this mean exactly? This potential. This is probably not the total commercial rooftop surface, but the suitable portion of this.
That is correct. Yes. They provide quite some information on that. Allow me not to reproduce those details. I went through them, but I cannot fully reproduce them. But indeed, it refers to both commercial roofs and as well as houses. But they have indeed taken into account using these geospatial data to skip all roofs which do not have this potential, either because of shading or the angle, or all north facing, etc. And for the production, they've calculated. Well, the report goes on also in terms of production capacity. They've still calculated with panels having a capacity of 270 watt peaks. You don't see those that much anymore, at least here. But they did not calculate with the annual reduction of efficiency of a solar panel, of the cells. That's what was left out of the equation. But generally speaking, yes, they did calculate this on the basis of roofs which are deemed fit for a solar roof. And I think they took the municipality as a base of Utrecht. I'm sorry, the municipality of Utrecht. Beautiful. That's where we're based, actually. They took that as a basis because they had the best solar data available of all rooftops on their within their borders, and they took that model as a basis for rolling it out for other municipalities. On how much can you actually install on a particular surface.
Okay, interesting to know. And by the way, I have a couple of people indicating that they would be interested to read more about this. Do you know whether this report is actually publicly available somewhere, or?
It was absolutely publicly available on the website of Deloitte.
Okay.
But I will check.
That's great, and people can just search for it.
This was a 2018 report, by the way. Yeah.
So it's been a little while.
Yeah, we had some older reports from our organization as well, but I chose to use this one as being the most recent and using also this geospatial data.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit again about the carports. Amelie, we do know that there is now not a category, but carports can be accounted as rooftop.
Yes.
Like for the future, what do you see? What's in the cards for the carports in the Netherlands? Because e-mobility, the Netherlands is a leading country in e-mobility in electric vehicles in Europe. Do you expect more specific arrangement and guidelines for carports as well, or is like the change that has been made that carports can now be accounted for as rooftop solar? Is this sufficient for the upcoming period, you think?
Well, we have to find out, of course. So I'm very interested to know what the listeners will think about this. But we lobbied, of course, as Holland Solar for allowing carports as an interesting application of solar PV in the SDE. And this was successful thanks to all our members and their input. So we have to find out if this will bring better conditions for carport PV, but I think we do, and there will be. do not expect there will be other types of instruments to stimulate carports, but municipalities, I guess, will have a role in this in the future.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Okay, so we might see some very diverse policies on this, depending on which region. Yeah, yeah.
On which region and what the municipality, have for ideas for themselves. You know, it depends on how many parking spaces are there, and if the citizens ask them to make solar roofs, etc., and so on. So this is all due to the local democracy mechanisms and the outcome of elections, etc., and so on. Yes.
Yeah.
And if I may add, Christian, I would appreciate any feedback the present people in this webinar can give. What we hear at present is that it is still, at least we're happy with the fact that it is considered a rooftop, because that allows for a bit more subsidy than if it were to be considered land-based. But we still hear from many players that is still a fairly expensive way of installing PV as compared to rooftop or land-based. So if there's any feedback on that, I would much appreciate it.
Yeah, I will. I will see what I can forward, and also I encourage everyone to continue discussions with you as well over email.
Please, yes, please.
Yeah. And there's one more question also for you, Amelie, because of course we have the 35 terawatt-hour renewables cap. Someone has calculated that should represent about 1 gigawatt of renewables. So to say maybe 500 megawatt wind, 500 megawatt solar, and this is quite quite a cut in support, of course, for renewable energy compared to the 6 billion rounds. How do you view this impact for the acceleration of renewables in the Netherlands? Because of course the government wants to decarbonize the electricity mix. Do you think this will negatively impact that, or is there a reasoning behind this that it should be sufficient subsidy for the future, that they have reduced the amounts?
Yeah, this is of course a question I understand, because this is one of the major concerns we have as an association, that we never want, of course, that this will act as a cap, so a maximum. I think the calculation of the one who made this question is not okay. I think it's not about 1 gigawatt. Of course, it's about a lot of more gigawatt peaks, solar and wind. But on the other hand, yes, I think it's one of the major concerns we have, and of course it will not be forbidden to develop more, but the subsidy, as well as of course the regional energy strategy, will have this as an end goal. And on a whole, the 35 plus the 49 offshore wind will produce like 75% of the total electricity demand in the Netherlands in 2030. So this is what we think will happen. And so I think we have to check as an association if the amount of electricity demand will actually be as large as I think there will be. We think the electricity demand will rise due to, of course, the electrification of all kinds of segments in the Netherlands. So we need definitely more than 35 terawatt hours solar and wind. But on the other hand, we have to bear in mind that we will, of course, be asked not to develop more electricity than the demand is. So this is we are in the middle of the debate right now to avoid that this 35 terawatt-hour cap will actually cap the developments in the next years. So yes, but I understand the question very much. I hope this helps, but it's not yet ready.
Well, thanks for elaborating on this, Amelie, and explaining a little bit more, hopefully reassuring. I see now that it has already been 4 o'clock, so we have to round off. Are there any last words, anything else that you would still like to share with the attendees that we haven't touched upon yet?
Yeah, well, my major question would be how the listeners are thinking about this 50% of local ownership for ground mounted.
Yeah. I understand. So yeah, please, everyone listening, get in touch with Holland Solar also to discuss with them on this topic and other topics. So it can be adequately worked with for the future. Let's round off the webinar.
Thanks.
Thank you for the presentations, Amelie and Remco. Or Remco, you still want to share something?
No, just thanks. Thank you, everybody, for your interest in the Dutch market. We need you all, so please stay involved. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for the encouragement.
Everyone.
So I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion today, and we will publish the recordings and the slides on the website soon. And for now, I would like to ask everyone, please subscribe for updates or register right away on our event website. We will be publishing more digital content like this in the upcoming period. And lastly, we already received also a lot of interest from companies to be involved in the event, but there are also still a few opportunities to be involved. So please contact me or one of my colleagues to discuss this further. And lastly, thank you very much for joining, and I'm looking forward to welcome you hopefully in Utrecht in July. Thank you.